Welcome to another edition of Dungeons and Social Distancing with Nerdarchy.
Today we're going to be talking about playing a gnoll in 5e D&D. Welcome to Nerdarchy for Nerds, by Nerds. I'm Nerdarchist Dave, and as usual we'll be hanging out with this nerd.
Nerdarchist Ted.
Keep that D&D content flowing through your YouTube feed by rampaging all over that subscribe button.
But if you want that Nerdarchy content to keep showing up, take a bite out of that notification bell.
Alright, we are going to jump into today's video. We're going to be talking about playing gnolls as a player character in 5e D&D. And you know what? You could actually build that gnoll playable race out over on our sponsor, D&D Beyond. You could homebrew the heck out of that thing and make it so much easier. So it's just there, you make your character. But that's not all. There are so many features over in D&D Beyond. We use it to build our encounters, build our characters, look up information about the game. It is a giant database for all the official content.
But that's not all. They've recently released their new Dice Roller app as part of it. So you could literally play, run your games, run your character right there on D&D Beyond. It's super awesome. If that's not enough, the free content, the articles, the videos, the stuff that's in the SRD, it's just an amazing. You have to check out D&D Beyond. Just go do it.
Link in the description. So what are the problems with playing a gnoll character in 5e?
All right, well, if you're going to stick to the lore of, what the gnoll is in a typical D&D setting, it's going to be really difficult to play a gnoll. They have a demonic origin, they're nomadic destroyers, and they have a thirst for blood. Those are literally the headings right out of your 5th edition monster manual. And it says that gnolls are feral humanoids that attack settlements along the frontier borderlands of civilization without warning, slaughtering their victims and devouring their flesh. There is no compassion. There is no remorse. There is no good gnolls. In fact, if you were to try and become a good gnoll, you are just going to resort into a hyena and move along. The demon lord, Yenagu, however you want to pronounce his name, he is rampaged throughout the cosmos, and a pack of hyenas followed him, and they got turned into gnolls. These things just go out and kill, and that's it. So if you were going to stick to that lore, you really aren't going to play a gnoll. But if you want to create a hyena folk, if you like these things enough that you're going to play them as a PC, well, perhaps one or a group of them have turned off of Yenagu. Perhaps, there's a sect that have been cursed and they're forced to do good to make up for everything that the rest of their race has done to the planes. So you can totally homebrew something for your world and play a gnoll and have a lot of fun with it. And, go against that type that's built in there. I'm a huge proponent for making those kind of changes so that you've got this built-in lore of, well, there's the stigma for what a gnoll is, and people are going to want to attack you and say, like, whoa, I'm not like that, I'm not going to do that. So,
yeah, the big problem with gnolls by Raw is where you have goblins and orcs and other races that are culturally evil. Even the drow, right? They're all culturally evil. The gnoll is supernaturally evil. It's in their DNA, right? They were built this way. In the argument of nurture versus nature, there is none. There is only the nature of this thing because they were made this way by supernatural powers. But now, like Ted said, you can play the game however you want. You could change the rules in your world. Eberron has done it. Eberron has had the gnolls where they've broken from these demonic powers and they do something different. So that's completely up to you. So now we're going to look at actually turning them into player characters and what that would look like. Because if you turn to your DMG page 282, chapter 9, NPC features, we actually do get a little bit of information. I don't think it's quite enough to wholly make our character from, but it gives us somewhere to look at. And it says our NPCs should have a +2 to strength, -2 to intelligence, the rampage ability, and dark vision, which this isn't really a very good player race for 5e D&D. It goes against the balances of the other races. But we can draw inspiration from that, and we can also look at the stat block in the monster manual and kind of figure out where we want to go for using a gnoll as a player character.
All right, now there is a little bit of precedence for adding a negative modifier to stats within 5th edition. The base orc and the kobold do get a minus. That's not particular something that we prefer to do when we create races. So if you do feel strongly enough about that lower intelligence, you can give them that -2. But for what we do, for what we would say, we are not going to incorporate that in at all. If you want to be your typical gnoll, use 8 as your intelligence, as your dump stat, and move along. So we're going to say for stats, we're going to give them a +2 to strength and a +1 to dexterity.
Yeah, I would elaborate a little bit further on what you just said. I almost feel like the designers backpedaled anyway, right? If you look at the further releases of the Orc, they took away those penalties and actually made them a little bit better, because we have the Orc of Eberron and we have the Orc of from Wildmount as well. So both of which don't have that penalty, and actually they gave them some more stuff, realizing that the Orc, as it was in Vol's Guide, it was kind of junk as a player race.
I completely agree with you there. I feel it was a little bit of a backpedal, but knowing for certain it's not a standard practice. There hasn't been any re-release of kobolds to know whether that they want to completely go in that direction and not have negatives. Like I said, I would not propose to give anything a negative when we go ahead, and we're also going to give them dark vision. It completely makes sense. It's in the stat block for the monsters. This is what you would do for NPCs. How would you make a gnoll that doesn't have dark vision?
Yeah, it would make a lot of sense. We're also going to give them the rampage ability. It's good. It's a strong ability, but we don't feel like it's overpowered or that much better than some of the other things that races get. When the gnoll reduces a creature to 0 hit points with a melee attack on its turn, the gnoll can take a bonus action to move up to half its speed and make a bite attack. So it's got 2 limiting factors. 1, you have to reduce a creature to 0 hit points, and 2, you have to use your bonus action. And then the third limiting factor, even though I said there are only 2, is the fact that you can only make that extra attack with your bite, which, the bite is not amazing. It's decent.
Well, and obviously, if we're going to do that, then they need to have a bite attack. So, we've incorporated that. Your Fang Maul is a natural weapon, which you can use to make unarmed strikes. If you hit with it, you deal piercing damage equal to 1d4 plus your strength mod, instead of bludgeoning damage normal for an unarmed strike.
All it is a little boost in your damage die. It's not a big deal. You're always armed. The only way you can use it is rampage or replace one of your regular attacks. More than likely, you're not going to do that. It just gives you another option.
So, like, that lists, what would be within the stat block. So we had to get a little bit creative for here. And for us, an easy direction is to say, well, can we add skills? So when we look at the stat block and the monster manual, nothing shows that they are automatically proficient with a skill. So we looked at what the core of the race is. They are hunters. They are naturally derived from beasts. So we went with, more of those kind of things. So,
well, there's another area too, right? That is the fact that if you go into some of the other stat blocks, because there's multiple stat blocks for the gnoll, so we did take some inspiration from there, and from there we came up with a couple more skills to add to the list, and then we just kind of rounded out what we thought would make sense.
So we're going to give them feral instincts. You can choose one skill that you're proficient with from the following list: intimidation, perception, stealth, and survival. The nature of what the gnolls are, they are perceptive because they are hunters. They are intimidating physically. They're scary looking when you get into it. Having demonic origin, that totally makes a lot of sense. Given the fact that they use stealth tactics and, again, they're hunters, stealth and survival made a lot of sense for this direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And we still might be a little bit on the weak side. We could have maybe even went with 2 skills. But we feel like when you're doing homebrew, you should kind of be a little conservative, and you can always change it later if you feel like it was a little bit weak. Now we have languages, and our languages are going to be common and gnoll. Generally, they only speak gnoll, but as a player race, we decided we want them to have a common language as well. Let's face it, these guys aren't quite as cool as the grung, who can only speak grung. So we're like, hey, let's just give them common as a gimme.
Now, when we look at, the overall package, as Dave says, it is definitely underpowered, especially when you compare it to some of the other races. Why would you choose this over a Bugbear? Bugbear is a more solid build, but as Dave says, the homebrew we tend to go weaker with, because it is a lot easier to say, hey, this is weaker, can I get something else? And we add, than it is to be like, oh my god, that's too powerful, let's take something away. So that's our general standpoint on that.
Yeah, as a tweak, the things that I would look at doing is either adding, a second proficiency in, or maybe even going as a bonus action when the gnoll makes an attack action, they can make a bite attack, right? So those are the two areas that I would look to. I would look to the bonus action bite attack second and not first, because that's a bit more powerful than just being able to have another skill proficiency.
I would agree with that. So now, what would you say would be the character classes that someone would want to choose, as a default for a gnoll?
So if you're going to play a gnoll, the ones that are going to really jump out are pretty much all your martial classes. And thematically, they kind of work. You have your barbarian, fighter, paladin, ranger, rogue. You can do some other interesting things as well, but I think thematically, these are going to work pretty good, as well as what we did with the stats. These are also going to work well. Now, are there some other options that might be a lot of fun, like playing a wizard, a sorcerer, a warlock, or or even a monk? Clerics definitely work really well. Druids really work really well thematically. I think a druid is an excellent choice, especially if you're still playing them as kind of savage and primitive, even if they aren't particularly evil. Or if you're playing in your world, gnolls are completely different, but you go warlock and take Fiend Pact, this one's kind of leaning back towards the original origins of your gnoll. So I feel like there's a lot of fun choices you could make that aren't necessarily the optimum, but that's okay.
Apart from the martial classes, I really like Warlock and I really like Druid. I think both of those stand out as something pretty potent and could be a lot of fun to play with.
So with that, let us know what you're playing. What is your favorite monster race? Gnolls are so cool. Why not play a gnoll? If you like listening to us make up D&D playable races, then you might want to check out our Goat Folk playable character race, Order of the Wizened D&D discussion.
That video was turned into a product for our patrons that we make 5e content for DMs and players every month.
That's not all. We do weekly patron-only live chats, monthly giveaways our patrons are automatically entered in, and more.
So until next time, stay nerdy.